The golden sun peeked over the horizon, casting a warm glow across the calm waters of the Nile. Tall reeds swayed gently in the morning breeze, their slender stalks reaching towards the sky. The riverbank was quiet, save for the occasional splash of a fish or the soft chirping of birds awakening to greet the new day. In this peaceful setting, a young girl named Miriam stood silently, her heart racing with anticipation and fear. Miriam was a slender Middle Eastern girl of about 10 years old, with olive skin that glowed in the early morning light. Her dark hair was neatly braided into two long plaits that hung down her back, tied with simple twine. She wore a faded tunic, its once vibrant colors now muted from countless washes in the river. Her large, expressive brown eyes darted nervously from side to side as she clutched a carefully woven basket close to her chest. Inside the basket, nestled among soft blankets, lay Miriam's baby brother, Moses. He was barely 3 months old, with chubby cheeks and a tuft of black hair atop his head. His tiny fingers curled around the edge of the blanket as he slept peacefully, unaware of the danger that threatened his young life. Miriam gazed down at him, her heart swelling with love and determination. "Don't worry, little one," Miriam whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle lapping of the water. "I'll keep you safe, I promise." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she was about to do. The weight of her responsibility pressed heavily on her young shoulders, but she refused to let fear overcome her. With trembling hands, Miriam carefully made her way through the reeds, her bare feet sinking slightly into the muddy bank. She moved slowly, cautiously, her eyes constantly scanning for any sign of danger. The basket felt heavier with each step, as if it were filled with all her hopes and fears for her brother's future. As she reached the water's edge, Miriam paused, her heart pounding in her chest. The river stretched out before her, vast and intimidating. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her mother's words. "The river is our only hope," she had said, her voice filled with sorrow and determination. "It will carry him to safety." Miriam opened her eyes, resolve strengthening her spirit. She knelt down, gently lowering the basket into the water. The reeds around her seemed to bend inward, as if they too were trying to protect the precious cargo. "Be brave, little Moses," she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. "May God watch over you." As the basket bobbed gently on the surface of the water, Miriam felt a mix of emotions wash over her. Fear gripped her heart, but there was also a glimmer of hope. She watched as the current slowly caught the basket, carrying it away from the shore. The sun's rays danced on the water's surface, creating a shimmering path that seemed to guide the tiny vessel. Miriam stood up, her eyes never leaving the basket as it drifted further into the river. She began to walk along the bank, following its progress. The reeds parted before her, as if clearing a path for her to keep watch over her brother. Her feet moved silently through the soft mud, leaving no trace of her passage. As she walked, Miriam's mind raced with thoughts and questions. Would someone find Moses? Would they be kind to him? Would she ever see him again? The uncertainty of it all threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on her duty to watch and wait. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its warmth caressing Miriam's face. She wiped a bead of sweat from her brow, her eyes never leaving the small basket that carried her hopes and dreams. The river's gentle current guided it along, sometimes bringing it closer to the shore, other times pushing it towards the center. Hours passed, and still Miriam walked. Her legs ached and her throat was dry, but she refused to give up. She had promised to keep Moses safe, and she intended to keep that promise for as long as she could. The landscape around her changed as she walked, the familiar sights of home giving way to new and unfamiliar territory. Suddenly, Miriam heard voices in the distance. She quickly ducked behind a cluster of tall reeds, her heart racing. Peering through the stalks, she saw a group of women approaching the river. Their colorful robes and elaborate hairstyles marked them as members of the royal household. Among them was a tall, regal woman with a golden headdress, the pharaoh's daughter. Miriam held her breath as she watched the women wade into the shallow water, laughing and splashing. The pharaoh's daughter moved with grace, her eyes scanning the river's surface. Suddenly, she stopped, her gaze fixed on something floating nearby. Miriam's heart leapt into her throat as she realized it was Moses' basket. "Look!" the princess exclaimed, pointing to the basket. "There's something in the water." Her attendants rushed to retrieve it, carefully lifting it from the river. Miriam watched, her body tense, as they brought the basket to the princess. With gentle hands, the pharaoh's daughter lifted the blanket, revealing the sleeping baby inside. A collective gasp rose from the women, followed by soft coos of admiration. The princess's face softened as she gazed at the infant. "It's a Hebrew child," she said, her voice filled with wonder and compassion. "Someone must have placed him here to save him from the decree." Miriam's heart raced as she listened, hardly daring to breathe. In that moment, Miriam felt a surge of courage. She stepped out from her hiding place, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Excuse me, Your Highness," she said, bowing low. "If you wish, I could find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child for you." The princess looked at her, surprise and curiosity in her eyes. "You are brave to speak to me, little one," the princess said, her voice kind. "What is your name?" Miriam stood up straighter, meeting the princess's gaze. "I am Miriam, Your Highness," she replied, "and I only wish to help." The princess studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Very well, Miriam. Find me a nurse for this child." Joy and relief flooded through Miriam as she realized her plan had worked. She ran as fast as her legs could carry her, back to her home where her mother waited. "Mother," she cried as she burst through the door. "Come quickly. The princess has found Moses, and she needs a nurse for him." Miriam's mother's eyes widened in disbelief, then filled with tears of joy. She embraced her daughter tightly, her voice choked with emotion. "You've done it, Miriam," she whispered. "You've saved your brother." Together, they hurried back to the river, hope blooming in their hearts like the lotus flowers that dotted the Nile. As they approached the princess, Miriam felt a sense of peace wash over her. She had faced her fears, shown great courage, and saved her baby brother. The future was uncertain, but in that moment, standing on the banks of the Nile with the sun shining down upon them, Miriam knew that anything was possible. Her family was together, and love had triumphed over fear. The river that had carried Moses to safety now seemed to shimmer with promise, a testament to the power of faith, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of family.